All right, welcome to today's Explainer. We are jumping straight into The Cursed Book, Anatomy of a Nightmare. Today we're going to unpack a story that totally dissects how psychological horror really operates. You know, that terrifying space where the perfectly mundane abruptly twists into the supernatural. So let's just get right into it.
Imagine this. What actually happens when an inheritance comes with an ancient, inescapable evil attached to it? That question is the entire foundation of our story. We're following Mia. She's a 25-year-old living in Los Angeles, and her life gets completely upended when she inherits a house in this small town in New Zealand. Her grandfather, Richard, had just mysteriously vanished. Now, dealing with a deceased relative's estate is already an absolute nightmare of paperwork and sorting, right? But for Mia, it becomes a literal nightmare. Her plan is so straightforward. Fly out, clean the house, sort the documents, sell the property, and just go home. But as you'll see, that totally ordinary task is sitting right on top of a dormant, ancient evil.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sensory contrast that makes psychological horror so incredibly effective. On one hand, you have the setting. Dense pine forests, rolling hills, a deep, quiet lake sitting right behind a small wooden cabin. I mean, it sounds idyllic, like the perfect, serene getaway. But then, on the other hand, you have the unsettling reality. The local postman arrived one day, and the house was just left wide open. Richard was entirely gone. The police searched the property, they dragged the lake, combed the woods, absolutely nothing. He was eventually declared dead. The psychological tension literally starts right here. A house left wide open in a peaceful forest? That isn't just a potential crime scene. It's a massive anomaly that suggests something deeply, deeply unnatural has happened. So, when Mia finally arrives, she spends her entire day doing what any of us would do: cleaning. She's sorting through old tools, untangling fishing gear, moving wooden crates and heavy iron shelves out in the garage. This is actually a brilliant narrative device. The psychological horror is grounded entirely in this mundane, repetitive physical labor. Her mind is just occupied with dust and old metal, completely oblivious to the threat lurking right there. But then, squeezed between the very last shelf and the back wall, she finds a thick bundle wrapped in black cloth. Moving from just cleaning an old garage to unearthing something deliberately hidden away, that builds such a creeping, intense sense of anticipation.
Well, when Mia pulls back that black cloth, she doesn't find, a dusty old paperback. She finds a thick tome bound in what looks exactly like distinct patches of flesh-like leather. And right dead in the center of the cover is this highly disturbing circular symbol. It's these tangled tree roots weaving together to form a genuinely terrifying face. The crucial takeaway here is that before she even opens the cover, the book initiates a psychological assault. It triggers this innate, primal human revulsion. The texture and the imagery are just so inherently unnatural, they're practically designed to make your mind recoil in absolute dread. And, of course, she makes the fateful decision to open it. Things escalate instantly. The contents inside are deeply disturbing. She finds strange, jagged words written in this deep red ink. The margins are completely filled with bizarre symbols and drawings, upside-down trees, tall shadowy monsters with terrifyingly long teeth emerging from fog. But honestly, the most unsettling detail? There are these strange eye-like symbols drawn in a way that gives the reader the distinct, paranoid sensation that the book is literally staring right back at them from inside the paper. That voyeuristic element is classic, top-tier psychological horror. It completely strips away the safety of being just an observer and suddenly turns the reader into the prey.
Now, pay attention to the absolutely terrifying speed at which Mia's reality crumbles. First, her eyes catch specific words, and in 1 second, she starts reading them involuntarily. She has completely lost control of her own body. Within 5 seconds, a sharp, intense burning sensation strikes the fingers of her right hand, forcing her to slam the book shut. But it is way too late. Within a single minute, the sky outside turns pitch black, violent winds start bending the pine trees, and that calm lake begins violently churning. Give it 2 minutes, and a massive flock of black crows begins circling the farmhouse. A perfectly quiet afternoon descends into cosmic supernatural chaos almost instantly. Amidst all this insane chaos outside, Mia looks down at her hand. Between her fingers, a thin black line has emerged, but it doesn't look like a typical burn mark. It looks and feels exactly like the roots of a tree, slowly spreading and crawling right beneath her skin. This is exactly where visceral body horror intersects with psychological horror. The terror isn't just outside in the storm anymore. It has violently and physically invaded her own body, literally corrupting her flesh in real time.
You know, this whole concept of a cursed book acting as a catalyst for unimaginable terror is such a powerful recurring theme in horror. Our source material actually draws a really direct parallel to the upcoming film release Evil Dead Burn, which is hitting theaters on July 10th. In that story, a character named Alice arrives at a family farmhouse and discovers a creepy Book of the Dead, inadvertently waking an ancient demonic entity that turns the house into a living hell. It brilliantly illustrates how ancient evil texts serve as these universal triggers. They are literal Pandora's boxes, just waiting for an unsuspecting person to turn the page and unleash absolute psychological and physical torment.
So, in a totally understandable, desperate attempt to regain some control, Mia takes action. Step 1, she frantically wraps the book back in the canvas and shoves it behind the shelf. Step 2, she locks the garage tight. Step 3, she retreats to the presumed safety of the upstairs bedroom. And then, Step 4 happens. The supernatural storm abruptly stops, the sky clears right up, the lake calms down, the crows just vanish. But Mia's hand still bears those deep, black root lines. She is completely exhausted, drained of all her energy, and she falls asleep. This sequence perfectly captures the psychological manipulation of the curse, giving the victim a completely false sense of security right before the real nightmare begins.
Then, the silence breaks. Mia's fragile rest is completely shattered by a loud, desperate sound. A man screaming for help from the drawing room downstairs. I mean, just imagine the pure dread in that moment. You're alone, you've just survived a major supernatural event, the house is supposed to be empty, and now someone is shrieking from your living room. She slowly creeps down the stairs, and you can just feel every single step heavy with anticipation and fear.
What she finds stops her dead in her tracks. Sitting right there at the dining table is her grandfather, Richard, the man the police searched for. The man who had been officially declared dead. He is alive, but barely. He is severely emaciated, wearing muddy clothes with these deep, dark circles under his eyes. And sitting right next to him on the table, it's that same cursed book. The psychological shock of seeing a presumed dead loved one, coupled with the absolute horrific state he is in, leaves Mia completely paralyzed with confusion and fear.
Trembling, Mia manages to calm him down and gives him some water. Richard is frantic, right? He's constantly checking the corners of the room and staring at the ceiling. And then, he begins his terrifying confession. Years ago, he actually found that same book buried behind a shelf. When he read it, he started hearing strange voices. He began seeing faces that would morph into the likeness of his loved ones. He realized the book housed an incredibly evil, ancient entity. Terrified, he abandoned the house entirely and hid in the old cabins by the lake deep in the woods. But when he saw the massive storm and the swarming crows that evening, he knew the cycle had started again. He came back to save Mia. But before Richard can even finish his horrific tale, his eyes dart over to the kitchen window. This is where the claustrophobic dread absolutely peaks. Mia follows his gaze and sees a terrifying figure standing out in the pitch-black woods. It appears to be a girl, and her entire face is severely burned. She is just standing there in the darkness, staring right back at them. The paranoia is now absolute. They are trapped inside the house with the book, and something horrific is waiting for them on the outside.
And then the psychological terror shifts straight into the uncanny valley of possession. Right before Mia's eyes, her grandfather's face contorts. The veins in his neck bulge out and turn entirely black. His eyes roll back, turning completely, terrifyingly white. This demonic, aggressive fury totally takes over his body. It is the ultimate psychological horror. Watching the one person you trust, a family member who literally just came to save you, morph into a completely unrecognizable, hostile monster.
As if the possession wasn't bad enough, the environment itself turns against Mia. The house literally comes alive with the ancient curse. Without any wind at all, the heavy cover of the book on the dining table opens on its own. The pages begin furiously turning by themselves. And with every single page that flips, the dark, circular root symbols from the cover begin magically projecting onto the wooden walls of the house. Even the dead ashes in the fireplace suddenly erupt into roaring flames. The entity isn't just in Richard. It is consuming the very architecture of the house.
Now notice the really stark comparison here between Mia's human vulnerability and the demonic force. Desperate to stop the madness, Mia lunges to slam the book closed, but the second she touches the cover, The veins in her hand burn with an agony so intense it feels like her palms are filled with hot coals, and the black symbols begin spreading across her skin again. In stark contrast, possessed Richard grabs a heavy candle stand from the table. Boiling, melted wax pours directly over his bare hands, but he doesn't even flinch. He makes absolutely no sound. He feels zero pain as he aggressively advances on Mia, wielding this flaming stand like a weapon.
The climax happens in this rapid, chaotic blur. Outside, the sky has turned pitch black again. The crows are swarming like crazy. Inside, Mia is backing away from her possessed grandfather. In a desperate bid for survival, she shoves Richard. He crashes hard into the wooden wall. But the flaming candle stand he was holding flies right into the heavy house curtains. In seconds, the ancient dry wood of the cabin catches fire. The entire house goes up in a blazing inferno, and Richard, trapped by the entity and the impact, is consumed by the roaring flames.
And this brings us to what I believe is, hands down, the most masterful psychological twist of the entire narrative. Mia frantically runs to the kitchen window to escape into the woods, heading toward the exact spot where she saw the girl with the burned face. But as she pushes against the glass and the massive flames rise up behind her, illuminating the darkness, she realizes the horrifying truth. There was no girl in the woods. The burned face she saw earlier staring back at her, that was actually her own doomed reflection in the dark glass. It was showing her a horrific premonition of her inevitable fate. Her mind completely breaks at this realization of inescapable destiny.
Trapped by the fire and the sheer paralyzing weight of that psychological revelation, Mia is completely engulfed by the flames. There's no last-minute rescue here, no clever way of breaking the curse. The horrifying vision she witnessed just moments before becomes her immediate reality. The ancient entity claims its final victim in that burning wooden cabin, fulfilling the dark promise of the cursed book.
Later, the fire brigade finally arrives, but they are far, far too late. When the police investigate the scene, they find a grim reality. The entire farmhouse has been burned to absolute ash. Among the ruins, they discover the severely burned bodies of Mia and her grandfather Richard. The authorities are left shocked and entirely without answers, staring at a tragedy that completely defies all logical explanation.
But here is the absolutely chilling final thought I want to leave you with today. The house burned to the ground. The grandfather and granddaughter perished in the flames. Yet sitting right there on the charred remains of the dining table, completely untouched by the inferno, perfectly intact, is the Book of the Dead. It leaves us with a terrifying, lingering realization. The curse doesn't end with Mia and Richard. The entity is simply waiting. So, who will be the next unsuspecting person to pick it up and turn its pages? Thank you for exploring this fascinating anatomy of a nightmare with me. Keep wondering, keep questioning, and I'll see you in our next explainer.